Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out again this week with us on Todd-versations. If you know him, you know. And if you don't know him, trust me, you're going to find out. I am super thrilled for my guest today. He is somebody that I have walked behind and learned from when I had no gray hair and was very green and very wet behind the ears, the whole 9 yards. Somebody I consider a mentor, somebody that has influenced me in my career. But more importantly, he's influenced this industry in such a big way. So please, everybody, give it up for the one, the only, David Weinstein. Dave, welcome.
Thank you very much, Todd. I'm really glad to be here and glad for the opportunity to make some mischief with you together.
And I love it.
Won't be the first time.
No, it will not, and I appreciate it. And I just want to just start off. I'm hoodied up today. I got my hoodie on for those that are watching us, streaming this thing. They can see us. I got my hoodie on today, and you're not wearing a hoodie today, so you threw me a curveball.
Sorry,
but I had to come in. I had to come in strong with the hoodie.
It's true. I mean, me and the jeans and the hoodie, that goes back a long way. I'll tell you where that came from.
Dude.
Well, the hoodie was just because it's cold where I work and you got to wear something to go in and out of the cooler all day. But one time I was invited to make a presentation at a place that was, from my point of view, kind of an impressive place. So rather than doing what I usually do, which is to show up in jeans and a hoodie and say whatever comes to mind, I actually wrote out what I was going to say. I put on slacks and a shirt, and I looked all businesslike and professional. And I sat up there on the stage, and they introduced everybody, and all the people they introduced were, had executive directors of this and published that, and on the XYZ committee. And the moderator came to me and forgot my name. couldn't bring my name to mind, just couldn't do it. So I got up and I read what I'd had written out, and there were a couple of people in the audience that knew me, and they said, "That was the worst talk you ever gave. That was terrible." And after that, I said, it doesn't matter where they invite me. I could go to the White House for the Nobel Peace Prize, and they're going to get jeans and a hoodie and whatever happens to be on
Hell yeah.
Hey, and it's worked out a lot better ever since.
Damn. Hey, look at it this way. Superman isn't a badass till he puts a suit on, right?
Exactly.
I'm just saying.
Exactly.
Right. So if, Superman without a cape is just a guy wearing tights. That's the way I kind of look at it. So I don't disagree with you. It's
all about the hoodie and the jeans and an attitude that, we're all in the end just another body of protoplasm on the way to compost.
Damn straight there. Well, like I said, I got my hoodie on today. I got my hoodies for golf on today, supporting inner city girls to learn the game of golf. And I find that to be worthwhile. So anytime I can wear this thing out in public and shout messages about increasing girls' participation in sports, I'm all down with it. No, so let's get into this, because sure. I got a shit ton of questions, and I'm excited about this. I'm expecting this to get sideways and off the rails, which I'm already throwing it out there, which I hope it does. But for those that don't know, and I'm going to frame up a little bit, and I'm going to let you have a time, and I'll shut up for a sec. But you've been around this business. You've been around the produce business, the organic produce business, for a very, very long time. You are really, truly one of the godfathers out there. You are a mentor to a lot of people. You've taught a lot of people from how to sell, how not to sell, how to be a decent human, how not to be a decent human, and when to shut up and when to speak. And like I said earlier on when I was introducing you a little bit, you've been somebody that I followed. I don't know. I've shared this story with you before, but I'll share it on the air now again. But when I was young, coming up, learning how to buy on the streets of Los Angeles at 1:30 in the morning, you were somebody that I would follow behind. You never knew I was back there because I was very stealth. I was definitely hiding most of the time. But I was behind you, watching what you bought and figuring out how to become a better buyer, following you. And so if you went over to Valley and bought something, I would be right behind you. Like, what did he just buy? I never get your price. I never even tried for that. I didn't even care. It's just like, great. Well, I want some of those too. And I realized that was a fast track. So I want to give you a little kudos before we get started. But if you wouldn't mind, just briefly, give everybody a little bit of bio. Tell them who you are, what you've been up to, and why the hell you're hanging out with me today.
I was moved to Los Angeles, and I was in college, and I was finishing up in college. And so I had a fair amount of free time, and I really liked cashew pieces, raw cashew pieces. And the only place in those days, this was 1976 or something, the only place you could really get those in bulk was in a food co-op, because they really didn't have natural food stores, and you couldn't get all that stuff in the supermarket. So we joined the food co-op in Santa Monica called Co-Opportunity. Wow. So that we could get ourselves the kind of food that we'd gotten used to eating. That was at a time, this is so long ago, you have to understand, this is before the internet, this is before cell phones, this is before fax machines, this is before long distance phone rates were cheap. This was so long ago. It was before Whole Foods.
Yeah.
And in those days, the phrase whole food was something that came from what was then called the alternative food system, where the idea was that people would be better off eating food that hadn't been processed, hadn't been broken down into its part and reassembled by some industrial process. And so if you were going to eat grain, you ate whole grain. If you ate nuts, you ate whole nuts. You didn't break everything down and grind it up and reformulate it and add a bunch of additives. And that was called whole foods. And so we were eating whole foods. And so I wound up at the co-op to get my whole foods. And in those days at the co-op, you had a volunteer requirement. So I volunteered in the produce department because it was the liveliest place in the store. And I got to know the kid who was buying the produce in those days. And his name was Steve Ogawa.
Wow.
And I'll get back to Steve in a minute. And Steve was the buyer. And I said, where's the produce come from? He said, well, I go to the produce market and buy it. And I said, well, could I come along? And he said, sure, meet me here at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I was, finishing up college. I was awake at 3 in the morning anyway. I didn't care. So 3 in the morning come down to the co-op, and he was there, and we left for the market. And I walked around and I watched him, like Todd, like you were saying. I just, followed him around, watched what he did. But I was braver than you were. I actually listened to him talk, and I listened to the way that people talk to him, and I listened to the way that people talk to each other. And to be as polite as I can be, the language was extremely Shakespearean. Okay.
Yeah.
It was a language that was visceral and blunt and down to earth, but it had a rhythm to it.
Yeah.
And it was poetic, and it was clear. It was a wonderful, wonderful language. And there was a fellow there who has nothing to do with organic produce, but I'm going to call him out anyway, because he was about 6'2", and he weighed probably 375 pounds. And he could have got a job as a foghorn if he couldn't make it in the produce business. And he was the most vulgar and most profane and most joyous and enthusiastic and charming son of a gun that you ever met. And his name was Al D. Thomas.
Yeah.
And he was a salesman in one of the houses. And people would just go over there. They weren't even going to buy anything. They just would stand around. They listened to him talk, because he was just, the way he talked was rap, it was hip hop,
it was crazy.
Poetry, it was wonderful.
It was a great learning curve. The market was a great learning curve.
And I just listened to that, and I just thought that was the best thing ever.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I learned. There's the life lessons on the street of Los Angeles back in those times when I was out there are some of the things that today kind of shape some of the things. And you're right. It was if you didn't have a thick skin, you were at the wrong place at the wrong time back then, because
yes,
it was not for the faint of heart.
No, sir.
So you've been doing this a heck of a long time, right? And I mean, you've been in this organic space a long time. You were in this space when there wasn't a space. You were in this space when we worked to create the space, and when pre-Alor, all these other things. So my first question I want to throw at you is, how do all the different aspects, of organic produce compare from your beginnings to today? And I know that's a really broad question, but nonetheless, I think would be great, because my goal is, in our time together, is that, as I said earlier, the one, if you know, and if you don't, you don't. But, I'm hoping that people will take some, especially the young folks that are in our industry, will take some time to listen to this and really get to appreciate what was done, how it was done, to get to the point we all are today, walking the walk that we have and the runway we have to be in. So if you wouldn't mind, just share a little bit about then and now.
I'm going to tell you one more market story.
Hi, I'm Nate Hefty, Vice President of Sales at Superior Fresh, the nation's largest aquaponic farm located in central Wisconsin. Thank you for listening to Todd-versations and Todd Bits. Check us out at www.superiorfresh.com to learn how we raise our Atlantic salmon on a non-GMO organic diet. And they thrive in water naturally filtered by our USDA certified organic leafy greens, never treated with hormones, antibiotics, or pesticides, and packed with 2 times the omega-3s. This is salmon as it should be. Shop with us online and use the discount code TLC 2022 to receive free shipping on all of our American Heart Association's Heart Health Checked Atlantic salmon. At Superior Fresh, we are changing how food is grown to change the world. Remember the code TLC 2022 to get free shipping.
Tell me 2 more market stories. I don't give a shit.
Market story. Well, first of all, Steve lasted about 3 more weeks after me. And one day I was sitting in the back of the store, and he walked by, and he had a scowl on his face, and he flipped me the keys to the truck, and he flipped the checkbook to me, and he said, "Here are the keys. Here's the truck. Here's the checkbook. I quit. You're the produce buyer." And that was my first produce job, buying produce for Co-Opportunity. And
wow.
So I was like, okay, I didn't even know how to drive a stick shift truck, let alone how to do anything else. But there I was.
Trial by fire, baby. Trial by fire.
Go. Rock and roll. And so Steve went off to work for Mushrooms Incorporated, which was part of Mickey Weiss's deal. And Mickey Weiss was a celebrity, and he provided all the high-end produce to all of the high-end movie studios and restaurants in LA in the 50s and 60s, and was also someone who gave back a lot and did a lot of really meaningful charity work. And Steve went to work for him, and Steve did working as a buyer for Frida's for many, many years. So he wound up with a very good, very successful produce career. But when I knew him, he was just one angry kid trying to get the hell out of Co-Opportunity. But in those days, there were 2 sides. There was the organic people, and there were the conventional people, and we didn't like each other. They didn't like me, and I didn't like them, because we had, good food on our side, and they were just terrible. And they thought we were just a bunch of, well, I'm not even going to say what they said, because this is a family type of show.
No, it's not. It's not a family show. We can say whatever the hell we want. You can say, I don't care. Drop them. Drop the bombs.
Well, they just thought we were a bunch of dirty, hippie, communist people, type like that. So one day I was in the market, and I parked, in the market to go get something. And when I came back, my car was gone.
Welcome to Los Angeles.
and everybody was kind of standing around and with their hands in their pockets and a little smile on their face. And I couldn't find my car. And I looked around and I asked everybody, "You see my car? Where's my car? What happened?" Nobody would say nothing. They were just standing there, shuffling their feet, grinning, wouldn't say where my car was. So I'm looking around. I can't figure out where my car is. And finally, I look up. I don't know why I looked up, but I looked up. And little ways away, there was a stack of pallets, one pallet on top of another, about 12 feet high. And on top of this stack of pallets was my car.
Welcome to the club.
Yes, sir.
That's
So
like a good initiation.
I walked over and I said, would you all mind getting my car down from there? And they said, no problem. And they went and got a forklift and they brought my car down and said, here you go. Thank you very much. And that was kind of, one little example of what the market was like.
Right.
It was what it was. It was a place.
Well, it was like a giant. It was like let's be honest. It was like a giant locker room, is what it was. It was like a giant locker room at the filthiest YMCA ever. That's what it was. Absolutely. Yeah, that's what it was. Absolutely. Let's be honest. And I was there. I cut my teeth. I get it. I lived it. I can say it. I earned the right to say it. So don't yell at me down there. But I don't care. Right. No, but it's the truth. And but again, back to the point about being in education. But and thinking about what I was asking, when you think about back then, it's not like that today. It's a much different. No, it's a much different environment. It's a cash environment. It's neighborhood peddlers. It's just not the same vibe because the business itself has changed so drastically.
Correct.
So when you think about then and you think about now, what do you think some of the, kind of look at some of the different changes?
There's one thing, there's a million things you could talk about.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to pick on one thing. Back then, the people that were farming for the most part, and the people who were driving the trucks, and the people who were working in the warehouses, and the people who were working in the stores, and the people who came to the stores to buy their food were really all the same group of people.
Mm-hmm.
They really, not to overgeneralize, but they were mostly white, mostly college educated, people that had read books about organics and natural foods and the food system, and they had opinions about how the world should be, and they mostly agreed with each other. But I think it's so hard to explain to folks now. But in those days, the tribe you belonged to dictated the drugs you took. Okay. So if you were a conventional guy, you drank beer and you drank whiskey, and you never, ever smoked marijuana, and it would never cross your mind to take LSD. But if you were on the other side of the track, if you were the organic side, you didn't drink whiskey, you hardly ever drank beer, but you smoked marijuana like a chimney, and a lot of folks took a lot of LSD. So the tribe that you belonged to dictated the drugs you took. And there really was a lot, if the organic tribe, we had a lot in common with each other. We were very, we understood the world in the same way. And it really didn't matter whether you were a farmer or a consumer, or you drove a truck, or you worked in a warehouse. It was all the same group of people with the same social outlook, the same intellectual outlook, the same political outlook, going in the same direction. So it was very easy in those days to imagine that everybody had everybody's back. Okay. It was very easy, to say, if you're in a store, you want to help the farmer out, because the farmer was just another kid like you. And if you're a farmer, you want to help out the food co-op, because they're just a bunch of folks like you. You take the same drugs, you go to the same parties, you go to the same demonstrations, you believe the same stuff. It's all one group of people working to accomplish one goal, to bring to life one vision, and everybody participated in it.
Right.
Okay. And that's the way we worked. That's the way that we thought about things. And I've thought about this because I've tried to explain it to people over and over and over again over the years. And, it's like, you can't explain nothing to anybody. So I've tried really hard to explain it. And the phrase that came to me was that we had a continuity of interest. There was a continuity of interest all the way from the fella, in the furrow on the field, all the way to the person in the kitchen cooking the food, that we all had the same goal in mind, which was to create a new kind of agriculture, a new kind of farming, a new society based on that agriculture. And we all were working for the same goal. We all had, there was a continuity of interest. So the idea that a wholesaler would fuck a farmer, or that a farmer would fuck a wholesaler, or that a wholesaler would rip off a store was inconceivable, because we were all working for the same thing.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Everybody was friends with everybody.
Yeah, that's very true. And I agree with that wholeheartedly.
And now, oh, and we weren't very nice either, as we've talked about. Okay, we weren't very nice. But now we're all really nice. We're terrific. You know, we're conscious, we're woke, we're sensitive, we're considerate, we watch our language and we use the right words all the time. And we do all these things to make sure that we don't offend anybody or
Right.
upset anybody or anything. And we're, you know, we organize workplaces with coffee breaks and lunch breaks and all kinds of things to make life, you know, meaningful for people. And we've made it possible for folks to make enough money to raise a family and take a vacation and do all these things. And it's much, much, much better than it ever was.
Sure.
The only difference is now we've organized ourselves in relation to each other where everybody's everybody else's adversary. So,
yeah.
So every transaction between a grower and a buyer, somebody wins and somebody loses. Every transaction between a wholesaler and a retailer, somebody wins and somebody loses. Every time, you know, you talk to a trucker, somebody wins and somebody loses, because there's no continuity of interest. Everybody's now, they got their own deal they got to take care of. They got to make sure their enterprise is successful and grows. And, you know, what happens to the other guy's not their problem. And to me, the transition from a community where we all had each other's back to an industry where everybody is everybody else's adversary, that's the single biggest change that I've seen over the years. You know, we can talk about, you know, the vocabulary, we can talk about the clothes, we can talk
Sure. That's minor though.
Hours and all those things are really different.
Right.
But what's essentially different is we've gone from allies to adversaries.
That's interesting. Would you say, when you think about the original part of the question, would you say that that would be something you wish you could roll back and grab a hold of that before it got off the rails, before it kind of lost its, you know, not off the rail, but, you know, before it got onto that trajectory early?
Well, you know, it's funny.
Or is it just capital? Is it just capitalism? You know, evolving?
No. In the early days, you know, we used to have these really dumb conversations where somebody would say, well, which is better, organic farming or conventional farming? And why do you think organic farming is better? And, you know, you get into they were dumb conversations. But in the end, you know, I found myself saying, look, it doesn't matter what I think. It really doesn't matter what my opinion is. Okay. There's not enough resources on the planet. There's not enough petroleum. There's not enough of all the inputs that we need to do farm conventionally to keep farming this way. We're going to just run out of stuff and we won't be able to farm this way. So it really doesn't matter. You know, it's not a matter of saying like, well, should we farm organically or should we farm conventionally? We're all going to wind up farming organically anyway, because farming conventionally isn't an option. Okay, it's going to go away. It's just a matter of when. And I always said, you know, I'd rather look at it and say, you know, we can't keep doing this. Let's figure out something better to do and start doing that now, than wait around until we find out we can't keep doing it and then have to do it as a matter of catastrophe or something like that. You know, I'd rather do it ahead of time and do it thoughtfully instead of doing it at the last minute under pressure. But so to me, you know, the choice between allies and adversaries,
Mm-hmm.
is the same choice. We are going to have a food system in which we are allies. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
Well
there's not
said.
enough wealth, there's not enough resources to keep treating ourselves as adversaries. Okay. The only question is, are we going to learn to get along with each other? Are we going to learn to treat each other with respect? Are we going to learn to treat each other as allies before the catastrophe or after? After, we're all going to go like, oh man, I really need you. You're great. Okay. But yeah, you know, three guys in a ruined world. Yeah, of course you're going to help each other.
Right.
But maybe if we're smart, we can learn to be allies now.
Well, I mean, very well said. You know, when you think about the supply situation we're dealing with now across the board, you know, globally and especially in this country, you know, it's one of those things. And I firmly believe, you know, if anything comes out of what we're dealing with in this moment, is that the right people get in the room and say, we probably shouldn't do this again. How do we fix this? Right. And that's what pisses me off so much about some of these things, is that we sit there, we talk about fixing problems until we're blue in the face. And then the actuality is nobody does a damn thing, or it doesn't get any better, or we do these little minor fixes that make everybody feel good in the moment, but long-term don't necessarily give us the right solution that we need. And your point about, you know, coming together eventually, which you're absolutely 100% right. Why not work on it now? Why not make a difference now when we can, especially with as much energy is in the ag sector, as much as we realize food is a drug and how important it is to our lives, and the fact that it can help us as much as it can hurt us if we're not careful with it. So, I mean, you make a really, really good point.
The thing I know, when I was growing up,
mm-hmm.
when I was the littlest kid, you know, back in 1955, we used to play war. We used to go out in the empty lot behind the house, and we'd pile up the dirt clods from when they plowed the field and the dirt clods all dried out. We'd pile them up into walls, and then we get pieces of wood that we scrounged, and we'd make a roof over the wall. So we'd have a little fort, and we'd get in the fort, and we'd collect a bunch of rocks. And the guys on the other side, they'd do the same thing. So we had rocks, they had rocks, and then we'd creep out from under the little cave we were in, and we'd throw rocks at each other. And we were the Americans and the Germans, because it was just a few years after World War II.
Sure.
And so we played war. So, you know, I grew up in an adversarial atmosphere. And then I went to school, and, you know, did you get an A or did you get a B? You know, who's on the high list and who's the dummy, you know?
Right.
And so every aspect of life that I grew up with was competitive. You know, you don't share your work in school. You know, everybody is competing with everybody else to see who's going to get the best grade, who's going to get on the list or whatever it was. Everybody was all by themselves competing. And I got used to it. Okay, that's life, you know, it's fine. When my son went to college, same situation, right? But every single class he was in, they divided them up into groups, and they taught them how to work together as a group. They had group projects. They had to learn to get together, to work together as a group, to collaborate. Okay. And I watched this and I said, this is the strangest thing I've ever seen. Where's my college, right? Because I didn't recognize what he was doing. It, you know, that where was the, like, you know, did you get an A, get a B? You know, no, I'm in this group, and, you know, we got to do this and that. And I realized afterwards that we've gone through an enormous change. We're putting people out now into the workforce who expect to cooperate, who expect to collaborate, who expect to work in groups and in teams on projects that require everybody's input. Okay. And we're developing the management tools, we're developing the software, we're developing the communications tools, all designed to facilitate collaboration, teamwork, cooperation. Right. That's what this generation is building. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they're not even thinking about it. It's just the world that they expect. Okay. And then you look at the people like me, you know, or younger than me, but the people that have decision-making responsibilities, and they're doing everything competitively.
Right.
You say, but your children are living in a different world than you are. Okay. And so I am hopeful that when the 20-somethings and 30-somethings who live in this collaborative world get to the point where they're beginning to get some decision-making power, they're going to say, well, why don't we work together? Why don't we cooperate more with our customers? Why don't we collaborate more with our vendors? Why don't we create a structure to facilitate sharing of information all the way through the supply chain? And they're going to do it not because it's a good idea, but because that's what they expect. And that makes me very, very hopeful.
Yeah, no, I love that. Well said. Well said. I ask you a question, just I'm going to put a question out there and see how this makes you feel. What does feed your grandchildren like our grandparents ate mean to you?
Well, I thought about that because it's a funny question, right? You know, when you think,
because to me, it leans into exactly what you said about coming together eventually, right?
But Todd, the thing is, my grandparents, you know, they were eating in the 30s and 40s and 50s of the last century. Yeah. Okay. But people's grandparents now are people who were eating in the 60s and 70s. So, you know, what my grandparents ate had essentially nothing to do with what grandparents today were eating when they were growing up. I don't want my grandchildren to eat the garbage and junk and crap that today's generation of grandparents ate as children. That's terrible. Do I want my grandchildren to eat what my grandparents ate, my grandparents in the 30s and 40s? A lot more. Yeah. You know, a lot. When I was a young boy, my grandmother took me to the butcher shop and she taught me how to identify a fresh chicken by the pin feathers on the chicken. Okay. And that's what we ate. We ate a chicken that was killed less than 24 hours from when we ate it. Okay.
Right.
And you got to believe that that was a much more nutritious meal than the plastic wrap thing that's shipped in from Missouri or Arkansas, loaded with water and hormones and antibiotics and stuff. You know, my grandparents, they would, if my grandparents saw chicken like that, they wouldn't even bring it in the house. They'd take it right from the street to the garbage can. They're like, that ain't food. Are you kidding?
You get a chicken in front of some of these folks now that have a pin feather left in it, they're going to lose their minds. Well, you know, but we become so accustomed to easy, right? In America, we like it easy, right? We like other people to do the heavy lifting at times for us, and we expect that from our retailers. You know, it's a part of the narrative that retail inherited or brought on upon themselves, which is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. We've taken, for whatever reason, we've gotten away, and I think we're getting back to it. But to your point of kind of coming together, we've gotten away from understanding our food. We just accepted what was given to us. We accepted the fact that whatever frozen dinner came out in that thing you would put in the microwave, and you'd have that cobbler that was 5,000 degrees when it came out of the microwave, you know, and the brown piece of meat that looked like you were at the worst conference you've ever been at, as being good. We didn't think about the fact it wasn't good. We didn't think about all these other things, like Teflon pans. Like, they're great. It's nonstick. Oh, but it's going to kill you in 20 years. Right. So you have all these. Go ahead,
Todd. I want to go in another direction. I want to have fun with you. Okay.
Go.
You're talking about grandparents and grandchildren. Mm-hmm. You know, my experience is that we don't, as a nation, we're not real good at our history. We don't remember much. Okay.
No.
And I'm going to tell you now, in my opinion, where the modern food system, the food system that you know, that I know, that we all eat from, where that came from. Okay. And I can tell you exactly where it came from.
Go.
I can date it for you. Okay. Back in the 20s and 30s, well, in the 30s, we had in the United States what they called a depression. And there were a lot of folks unemployed. There were a lot of folks homeless. And there were a ton of folks really, really, really seriously hungry. People were starving to death. They died on the street because they couldn't get anything to eat. And it wasn't uncommon. People knew people in that situation. People saw people in that situation. It was visible. It was right in front of you. People, not just that all they could buy was junk food. They couldn't buy anything. They couldn't get their hands on anything to eat. Okay?
Right.
And it went on for years and years and years. And to where people were like, they were terrified because they said, but for this, but for that, I could be one of those people who dying of nothing to eat. And it was part of everybody's nightmares. Okay. That was reality for people in 1934, 35, 36, 37, 38. That was reality for American people in this country. Okay. And in 1939, The Wizard of Oz came out and Gone with the Wind came out.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I know Gone with the Wind is no longer politically acceptable for a whole variety of perfectly good reasons, but I think it's a fantastic, marvelous movie, and I'll tell you why. When they first put that out, it had an intermission. Okay. And right before the intermission, right before the end of part one, you've just watched Scarlet and Red racing through the destruction of Atlanta. It's all on fire. It's yellow. It's red. Buildings are falling down.
Right.
It's tremendous destruction. And they race through the ruins of Georgia, and it's devastation and dead bodies and ruined trees and ruined fields. And they get to Tara, and it's in ruins. Their safe place, their home place.
Right.
It's in ruins. And Scarlet is just overwhelmed at the destruction and the loss and the grief that she feels for what was her life. And she can't comprehend. And the last scene, she goes up to the ridge behind Tara and she looks over the ridge at the flames of Atlanta, the orange and red destruction of Atlanta. And in the way of films in 1939, where they overdo everything, she lifts her head and she casts her eyes into the future and she says, I will never be hungry again.
There you go.
Now, can you imagine sitting in a movie theater after 10 years of starvation?
Yeah,
10
right.
years of food shortages, 10 years of people dying of hunger, to sit in a movie theater and see that scene, to see that image and what it would have meant to you.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of the modern American food system.
That
was the point at which the people who ran the regime, the people who ran the government, who controlled the industries, who made the decisions about how Americans were going to live, realized that no matter what, the risk of political instability that comes with a shortage of food was not a risk they were ever going to be willing to take again. And they created a food system whose fundamental premise was glut.
Yeah.
Was too much all the time, forever.
Well, in all fairness, it wasn't a system, it was policy. That's the change.
Policy.
It was policy, not a system. Right. It was policy.
It was a policy. It was a political decision. And it was reiterated in about 1972, I believe, when Richard Nixon appointed Earl Butz the Secretary of Agriculture. And Earl Butz announced that the policy of the United States government with respect to agriculture was, quote, get big or get out.
Right.
Okay.
Well, hence the snack food industry.
Hence the snack food industry.
Right.
And so the United States has been politically committed in order to avoid political instability to a food system that overproduces constantly.
Right.
And we are now, you and I and all of our friends are in the process of saying, on behalf of that legacy, we need to find another way to feed ourselves. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the first thing that we need to do, in my opinion, knowing this history and knowing the destruction and the devastation and the harm that it has created, have to take a serious, sober look at that and say thank you, because in our lives, we have never been hungry. Okay. The policy worked, the system worked, it fed us. Okay. It took care of our needs for food from 1939 to now. And then say, but the cost of our food security is unaffordable, not by us, but by the planet. And we need now to say thank you for those who gave us this system, but we need to find a way to do better.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that, and it leads me to my next question. Let's talk about ag a little bit. I want to get into, I'm going to throw a question out about ag technology right now, because, you know, it's something that data technology is a big part of our world, right? And it's not going to change that, you know, and in fact, what the scary part is things we don't know about that are probably going to wake a lot of people up once we realize what they start to tell us they are, right? But nonetheless, so let's talk about ag technology a little bit and getting better. To your point about what you said earlier, you know, this inevitability of coming together because we're going to be forced to come together. Where do you see ag technology and you know, whether it's controlled environment, greenhouse, you know, I just spent time with the folks at NASA talking about food and space. You know, just give me the 411, if you wouldn't mind, on where your position is on that.
My opinion is that the more we know, the better we are. The more we understand, the better we are. I'm pro-science. I'm pro-inquiry. I'm pro-knowledge. And I think that we would be foolish to take the benefits of what we have learned, the technology that flows from science, and say, we don't care. We're not interested. Okay. That's just foolish. But science claims to be ideologically neutral, but it's not. Okay. Science reflects the values of the society in which it is conducted. Okay. And that means that the science that we do in the United States and have done has an unerring ability to make life easier for those aspects of the society that are most destructive to people's well-being, to people's livelihoods, to the well-being of the planet.
Right.
And so we need to say, yes, I'm in favor of the technology that flows from learning more about how the world works. But I want a science that is not ideologically committed to maximizing return on investment above all other values. I want a science that is committed to maximizing human well-being above all other values, which means that human well-being, human community, the human ability to work together with others has to come before return on investment. And so when I look at a new technology, I have to ask myself, does this enhance human well-being or does it diminish human well-being? And I think that a lot of the technologies that we have developed that have made it less economically feasible for rural communities to sustain themselves through a network of small farms that feed local communities, because it is more economically rational to destroy those farms and farm them with modern technology that replaces family farms and rural communities with industrial farms farmed by sensors and robots and drones and the like. And I don't think that that technology, as presently configured, operates to benefit human communities and human well-being. So I think our challenge is not to say I'm opposed to technology or I'm in favor of technology, but to say I am in favor of technology that benefits human well-being, and to be very critical of technology that whose only benefit is to make it easier for corporate agriculture to farm without labor, without a real basis in the land in which that it farms, to destroy rural communities, to destroy culture and agriculture. And I don't see that the debate over ag tech is being conducted on that basis. It's being conducted on in a sort of hysterical debate between pro-science people who have no sort of social awareness of the consequences of their actions, and Luddites who say, blow it all up, we hate you. And I don't think that's the conversation.
No, I don't just, I get where you're going. I don't know if I 100% agree with the whole angle. And I think about technology, yes, labor is a big thing, but let's face it, labor is the biggest issue most people have in their business today. And, I'm sure the payphone guys are feeling a little bit pissy at the cell phone guys, because they used to have a job on a street corner and they don't have those jobs anymore. And the world's going to change. But when I think about technology, I'm thinking about water. I'm thinking about 1,000 points of data that you're able to utilize. That says I don't necessarily need to put this on my crop because I don't need it nutritionally. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that technology brings. It's going to make feeding the masses, because we're going to have 2.5 billion people here. Whether we pop them out or they're coming on the spaceships, they're going to be here in 2050, according to the United Nations. So to me, I look at technology, you're right, it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. It can be dangerous, right? I mean, there's dangers in technology we're dealing with now that we don't even know about, whether you get into some of these crazy stuff. But I mean, I think that to me, I'm a little more open-minded to it, in the sense that I look at it from a resource standpoint. If we can reduce water, if you're in a greenhouse producing a crop that's healthy, nutritious, organic, whatever you want to call it, and using 90% less water, I look at that as a win. And I look at that in some ways as some of the core competencies of the organic trade itself. Is that, how is that playing into that narrative of doing better for the planet?
Here, Todd, let's disagree, okay? Let's say you're right, that a greenhouse operation with all of the digital technology to monitor it and manage it can produce a crop with less water. But let's take a step back and then say, but what is the environmental footprint of all of the materials that go into producing that greenhouse?
Agreed.
All of the metal, all of the silicon, all of the rare earths that go into all of the sophisticated digital technology, all of the energy that it takes to run all of that technology. Where does the energy come from? Where do the materials come from? Where do the raw resources come from? How many soldiers do we have to send to Africa for how long to make sure that we have access to the raw materials we need for the digital technology that we use to construct a greenhouse in which we use less water? It seems to me that if you look beyond simply the question of one particular resource to the question of the system in which that technology is embedded, I would say that the technology as a whole is less sustainable, is more resource intensive, is more committed to militarism and violence than simply a greenhouse that uses less water. And I think that it's narrow-minded and short-sighted to claim otherwise.
Well, I agree with where you're coming from, and and again, it's not an argument. I think it's just, and you're right. You give to get in a lot of ways, but I think when I look at what's coming out there, and I pay attention to the space,
right?
Being able to give technology to a grower that says, hey, we can fly a drone in your apple field and tell you by scanning the apples that you should pick in 2 weeks. Is positive data, right? That's a positive cost of food in a lot of ways, because you're going to put more yield to the grower. It's going to be better for him. It's good for all this other stuff.
But let me ask you a question about that.
Go ahead.
Because it's something that, I'm not a farmer. I've never been a farmer, so I can't speak to it. But I just wonder, if you have a 400 or 500 acre apple block, okay, and you're managing that block via drone, okay, does that represent an improvement over taking that 400 or 500 acre apple block and dividing it into 10, 40 or 50 acre apple blocks with 10 skilled, experienced, wise farmer walking their 40 acres and being in touch with them on a personal level and knowing from their own footsteps and their own nose and their own fingertips the condition of that 40 acres? Have we benefited those 40 farmers, or or is it better to farm it as a 500 acre block and send those 40 farmers to live in dingbat apartments in the suburbs of LA, wondering what the hell happened to their life?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, and it's a great summation. It's hard to answer that because it's just a little bit, in my opinion. But let me go back to something that you said.
Sure.
2 things. One of which, great, love it, family farm. 5-10 acre farms, I love it. Right, I'm all about it. The question is that we're in an environment that doesn't necessarily care anymore about that, is not willing to pay for what that's going to take. So let's throw that on the table, and that's a big ugly elephant in the room. And the second thing,
really,
I think,
funny to me, Todd, it makes me laugh. I've spent my life buying things and selling things, so I deal with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And to generalize over the last long time, I could say that most of the people that I buy from, most of the people on the growing and production side, are what you would call Trump voters. But most of the people that I sell to are what you would call Bernie voters. Okay? And here I am navigating between Trump voters on one side and Bernie voters on the other side. And we all seem to get along. I get along with the Bernie voters, I get along with the Trump voters. Okay? And to me, I think that that's a really good, that's what we need to begin to look at, is to say, how can we, I guess what I'm trying to say is this. I talk to people like yourself who look at technology as a positive, as an asset, as a path forward, to make changes that benefit all of us. And I talk to a lot of folks on the other side who say, all this technology sucks. It's the work of the devil. We need to get rid of it all. It's none of it's organic. It's not genuine. It's the worst thing in the world. And I get along with everybody. Okay, I get along with everybody. And I think the reason that I get along with everybody is this. You've touched on something I think that is really at the foundation of everything we've been talking about. The changes that we need to make in agriculture, the changes that we need to make to benefit human well-being, are ultimately not agricultural.
Right.
they're cultural and they're political.
Mhm.
Okay. You say, and I think with complete justice, there is no market, if you want to say, for small family farms. They're not competitive in this environment. And you're absolutely 100% correct. Okay. But is that an agricultural problem or is that a political problem? Is the reason that you can't compete on a 40-acre farm because the farming isn't competitive, or because the government hasn't enforced antitrust laws in the food industry for 50 years? And I would say that it's that. It's not that the farm is not competitive, that the farm is not efficient. It's that it is operating in a political environment that is deeply hostile to sustainable human communities. And that's the thing that we need to change.
Well, I think, yeah, there's a bit of the big get bigger and the small vanish in a lot of ways. But I think too, it goes back to what I just said earlier. I think it has to do with what the marketplace is willing to bear. And I think we live in a world where cheap is the biggest narrative. There's no consideration for good. There's just consideration for being cheaper. And I think that's where we become very dangerous. And when I think about
let's talk about what cheap is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the bottom, cheap has a hidden cost. Let's be upfront with that.
It's not a matter of that. That's true. I agree.
Yeah.
But to me, cheap means that I can buy it for not much money compared to how much money I have. So there's two ways to make something cheap.
Right.
You can lower the dollar that you want to spend for it, or you can give the buyer more money. Okay. So we don't need to continue on this path of ever lower prices. What we need to do is we need to get on a path in which buyers have more money.
Yeah. Well, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think if you take a look at the money that we waste, the money that we spend versus the money we waste is certainly a very unique and interesting conversation. We can go on that for hours.
This is the old Henry Ford thing, right? Henry Ford is famous for saying, I need to pay my workers enough so they can buy the cars that they make.
Correct.
Okay. And I think that Henry Ford was right. And I think we've spent 40 years imagining that we can pay workers less and less and less and less and employ fewer and fewer and fewer of them. And somehow when we get all the way to the end, all these low-paid, unemployed workers are going to come into the stores and buy all the things that we've made. And the truth is, they won't.
No, agreed. No, and when my position on technology is I think I look at things like this as a positive cost of food. A positive, where is it going to go? What is it going to lead to? When you think about going back, and I brought up greenhouses just because it's a hot button topic, but it's interesting when you think about food. When you think about the very first vertical farm, where the very first vertical farm was? You know who did that?
What?
NASA. NASA made the very first vertical farm inside of an old hangar, an old container that was used in the Mercury missions. And, that's where things started. Our government actually kind of started, which is kind of interesting, actually, when you go back to the technology. But my point being is that there's things about technology.
You're funny, Todd. When you asked me that, you know where my mind went?
Where?
The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It's probably the world's first vertical farm.
First vertical, yeah. Well, that's for sure. That's but when I think about technology, I like the fact that it's moving forward. I think we have to look at it. Not all of it's good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not so pro technology that I'm going to stamp out the world just because I think it's the way to go. That's dangerous in the same right. But there are things out there that are happening that I think there are powerful tools that I think could make this a better planet. Now, when it comes to labor, and I want to touch on this, I want to go back because you brought this up and see where your is. The biggest problem that I think that we have, and I'll speak with agriculture, and I'm sure I'm going to get hate mail for saying this. The biggest problem I think that we have is that we haven't done anything for our labor force when it comes to agriculture. We keep dorking around with trying to come up with a policy or rule, what it's going to be, this and that. We vacillate back and forth, and we've created this chaos ourselves by not solving a problem. It's like we talked about earlier. We have all these great ideas, and we don't solve shit.
I
And
agree
I
with
think
that.
that's a really big problem. And I think that's when you start to look at these tech companies that are trying to get rid of labor, it's a byproduct of bad labor policy and bad labor positions that is forcing this to become now accepted. So there's some of that needs to go back to your point exactly, that needs to go back and have a re-examination as to why is this becoming more popular.
To me, it's ludicrous to say that none of the technology that has been emerging in the last 30 years has any positive value. Obviously, let's just think of it this way.
Mm-hmm.
We're a couple years into a pandemic, okay, and the disease, as best we know, is transmitted through the air.
Right.
Okay, so the best thing you can do is separate people so they're not breathing on each other. Okay, so we now have a labor force that is migrated home, like me.
Yeah.
I work from home. Okay, and I'm able to function. Why? Because I have a computer, I have the internet, and I have the cell phone.
Right.
I am not in a position now to say no to the internet and the computer and the cell phone, because quite likely, if I'd spent the last 2 years having to do all this in a workplace with 75 other people, I'd be dead. Okay, the disease would have killed me. Okay, I would have died of COVID, but for the computer and the internet and the cell phone. So I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, well, I hate all the technology."
Agreed. Yeah, I'm not taking it that. No, I'm not taking it that
alive.
way. Yeah, no, I'm not taking it that way. And your point's valid. I just want to make sure that you're right, that there is technology out there that is as dangerous as it is good. It doesn't, you could take a look at, you want to get into the whole conversation about where we are with the pandemic. Take a look at the facts and what's happening with where we are and how we're treating it in this country versus others, the things that are out there that we can be making a difference with. I mean, it's, technology, sometimes technology and capitalism, you can't tell the two apart. And that's where I think sometimes it gets a little dangerous as well, right? When it all becomes about money. Well, yeah, when it all becomes about money, and that's what this, that's really the basis of our economy, right? That the top 1% continue to thrive on, and the median income folks are paying more to back to them type of deal. It's just the way it's a screwed up system, that is evolved to be where it is.
All I'm saying, we can agree about this. I'm just saying that I think that the kinds of things that you're saying have an impact on agriculture, and I don't think that it's had a positive impact. And I think that we're getting to a point now where everybody in agriculture, and I think this is really the thing that's most important. Mm-hmm. This is not an organic problem.
No.
Okay. This is a agriculture problem. Agreed. And the wisest people that I know in agriculture, whether they're farming organically or they're farming conventionally or they're farming both, they all recognize that we have a political problem. Whether it's economic concentration or whether it's labor or immigration, those are political problems that affect agriculture that we need to address.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. I love that. That was a great exchange. It leads me up to my next question I want to talk about, which is what people are dubbing, folks are calling the Weinstein Manifesto that you've put out, which is, a great read. There's 6 points, messages. It's very thought provoking. It's could be considered controversial, but it certainly is a worthy read. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it dovetails right into the conversation we just had a little bit, and kind of where we are with everything. But first of all, tell everybody what it is and why you wrote it. Then I got some questions about some of the topics that are under there. So don't spoil it for me.
Okay. The folks at OGC, Organically Grown Company, they really represent a model for how to do things in a lot of areas. And they sent around a questionnaire asking their colleagues, what did they think, was the future? How did they think that things were going to move forward, and how should they, OGC, do their work?
Right.
And they sent it to my boss, and he's busy, and he knows that I, like to shoot my mouth off. He said, "Would you mind answering this?" And I said, "Yeah, why? Fine, whatever, sure." So I got the questionnaire, and I went like, "I don't want to deal with this. I don't have time for this shit." So I sat down, and in about 20 minutes, I just like, "Whatever, here, shut
Boom,
up.
boom, boom. Yeah, right.
Yeah, fuck you. Haven't answered your question." And that was the Weinstein Manifesto. And it's only become the Weinstein Manifesto because David Lively read it and he liked it. And, he has a way with words. So he titled it the Weinstein Manifesto. It wasn't a manifesto. It was never a manifesto. It was an answer to a questionnaire.
Correct. So let's get into it. There's three things that I picked up on that I want to talk about that I just love. I think it's just worthy of our time and to give it. So, we talked about why you did it. So one of the things you talk about, why should we listen more?
It was addressed to the management at OGC.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really a kind of management level issue.
Right.
Okay. And from a management point of view, senior management, they, for the most part, except in Silicon Valley, they tend to be kind of old people. Okay. And not just that they're old, but they've been doing what they've been doing for a while.
Sure.
They kind of know how it works, and they're pretty sure of it. And that's pretty much a recipe for irrelevance. The surer you are that you know how things work, the more likely it is that you got it wrong.
Correct.
And so when I say we need to listen more, what I'm saying is that the people just coming up, the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings, who are seeing everything for the first time, we're seeing everything fresh, they have an opportunity to see things and say things that senior management, old guys that have been doing it forever and know how it works, they're never going to see. They're not going to want to deal with it. They're not going to hear it. And we just need to be a little bit humble and say, yeah, okay, I've been doing this a long time, but chances are I'm missing something really important. And if I take the time to get out of my comfort zone and listen to people that maybe I wouldn't think to listen to, maybe, just possibly I might freaking learn something.
Love it. Well, it's, what is it? What is the old expression? Listen to understand, don't listen to reply.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So here's another one I want to throw at you. Discriminate against the educated in hiring.
I wrote that. We talked about LA market.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's LA market or Chicago market or Hunts Point in New York or any produce market. Okay. In the 70s, it was very lively. Folks that worked in the market were making a good living. And not just the guys that owned the houses, but the sales guys were making a good living. The lumpers were making a good living. The drivers were making a good living. And when I say a good living, a guy working in a produce warehouse or a guy driving a produce truck was making more money than the guy doing that same thing for dry goods. Produce paid more. It paid more in the warehouse. It paid more on the drive for lumpers and drivers, paid more for salespeople, paid more for everybody. So it was a good living. And it was almost entirely made up of a group of people, not very many of whom were high school graduates. Okay. They weren't college educated. They didn't have an 11th grade vocabulary. Okay. They didn't, honestly, and this is true. Okay. Most of them couldn't have computed a margin. Okay. They didn't know what, and I'll explain what that means. I'm assuming that the folks that listen to this know what margin means. So I'm not going to explain that. But in the market in the 70s and even in the 80s, because they didn't think in terms of margin, because they didn't know how to compute a margin.
Right.
They had a phrase, they had a term, and the term referred to, how do you know if you're making money? It's a good question if you're in business, right? Am I making money or not? And the term that they had, you'll remember this, the term they used was nut. Remember nut?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, what's your nut? Have you made your nut?
Have you made your nut? Yep.
Right?
Yep.
What is a nut? A nut is the number of dollars it takes to pay all of the expenses you have. Okay. So if you've made your nut, everything past that is profit.
Correct.
Okay. That's how they thought. That's how they thought. They didn't think in terms of margin because they weren't educated. Okay. They made good living. They made a lot of money. They sent their kids to Berkeley and places like that. Okay. You know, they paid their help really well.
Sure.
But they weren't educated people. Okay. Now, but okay, and I'm sorry. But the other side of that was, and this is my own prejudice. So, you know, folks can disagree and it'll be fine with me. But my prejudice was that those same guys whose attributes were that they had a lot of energy, they were very strong, they could, you know, they could load trucks by hand all day long.
Sure.
Okay, and then get on the phone and sell. They had a lot of energy, a lot of vitality, a lot of intelligence. They were smart people. Okay, but above all, they were ethical. Okay, they were ethical. What does ethical mean? Ethical means that you could look somebody in the eye and say, are you going to do that? And if they said yes, they would do it.
Right.
If they made money, good. If they didn't make money, it's okay. I said I was going to do it, I'm going to do it. Okay. And in those days, you know, those guys sold loads of strawberries over the phone. Guy call you up and say, send me a load of strawberries. Okay. How much? $6. Okay. You know, a load of strawberries, the most perishable thing in the world, from California and New York, because somebody had a conversation on the phone. There were no written records. Nobody emailed a confirmation. It was a phone conversation. But you could count on it. You could rely on it. Okay. The company I worked for, Heath and Lejeune, was founded by Harlan Heath and Pat Lejeune. And their business, when they started, was to represent apple growers from the Pacific Northwest in the LA market. And what that meant was that the growers would load a truck, ship it to LA. Pat and Harlan would receive it. They would sell it. They'd compute their commission, and they'd return the proceeds to the grower. And the grower in those days had no way of verifying anything because the technology didn't allow for it. They trusted Pat and Harlan. And Pat and Harlan knew that they could do whatever they wanted. They could rip those guys off. They could steal and hurt those guys. They could put them out of business if they weren't honest. Year after year, season after season, crop after crop, load after load, Pat and Harlan behaved in an honorable and ethical way. They didn't cheat. They didn't steal. They lived by their word. Okay. And Heath and Lejeune to this day trades on that legacy of honorable, ethical dealing. Okay. Sure. And when I say ethical, what I mean is that was the most sophisticated technological tool that people had. They didn't have fax machines. They didn't have email. They didn't have digital photography. They had to trust each other. So they trusted each other.
Yeah.
Because that's the best they had. So that generation of people were honorable.
Worth hiring.
They were ethical. They were honest.
Right.
Okay. Now, today, we have all those tools, and we have an industry, at least on the office level, in which the majority of people are college educated. Okay. Which means that They don't have to have the same level of energy. They don't have to have the same level of physical vigor. They don't have to have the same ethics. They don't have to have the same kind of personal integrity because they have technological alternatives. They don't have to be honest because they send each other confirmations. They don't have to be truthful because they can talk to each other on email. Okay, they create written records of everything. So their personal character becomes irrelevant to the work they do. Plus, okay, they expect middle-class manners. They expect middle-class vocabulary. They expect middle-class level of how loud you talk in the office. They expect
Right.
all kinds of middle-class mores, which means that all of the people who built the businesses that they now work for are not acceptable as employees in those same businesses. Those same high school graduates with a lot of physical vigor and stamina and native intelligence couldn't get a job in most of the companies that their grandparents built. And to me, that's a tragedy. That's a freaking disaster. And so
Well, you put the emphasis back on the person, right?
Right. I want to hire people who can't sit still. Okay. I want to hire people whose head is moving all the time, who's looking everywhere all the time, who can't stop talking, who figured out new ways of doing things because they didn't know what the old ways were to begin with. I want people who are desperate and creative and have all the energy to build a new generation of businesses. Those are the people I want. I don't want, when my grandfather, no, my uncle ran a couple of grocery stores in Salt Lake City, and he came out to visit my parents. And my parents were very proud. And they said, well, you know, our son, he's going to go to college. And Paul looked at them with a twinkle in his eye. He said, oh, that's great. I always like to hire college men. And they said, oh, see, you know, why do you like college men? And he said, because they're really good at following rules.
Yeah.
I don't want people whose best talent is following rules. I want people whose talent is breaking rules.
I love it. Hence the reason I asked the question. I love it. You wrote something to me. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. And I think the manifesto is great. I hope everybody reaches out and you send them a copy. You wrote something to me in an email. We were going back and forth on a topic, and there was a line that you put in there in the email that I really, really pondered on and thought about for a little bit. And I want to ask you what it means, and I'm going to throw it out there and let you have some fun with it. But you wrote, I'm past tired of sitting quietly and listening to the organic version of the lives of saints. Share with me where that line came from in your encyclopedia up there in your head.
Hi, I'm Nate Hefty, Vice President of Sales at Superior Fresh, the nation's largest aquaponic farm located in central Wisconsin. Thank you for listening to Todd-versations and Todd Bits. Check us out at www.superiorfresh.com to learn how we raise our Atlantic salmon on a non-GMO organic diet. And they thrive in water naturally filtered by our USDA certified organic leafy greens, never treated with hormones, antibiotics, or pesticides, and packed with 2 times the omega-3s. This is salmon as it should be. Shop with us online and use the discount code TLC 2022 to receive free shipping on all of our American Heart Association's Heart Health Checked Atlantic salmon. At Superior Fresh, we are changing how food is grown to change the world. Remember the code TLC 2022 to get free shipping.
It just makes me laugh. That's all. It's funny. Let's see. Everybody likes to clean up their past. You know, when we look back at where we came from, we like, you know, it's like when you tell, you know, when your grandkids come to you and say, you know, Grandpa, you know, what was it like when you were growing up? You don't tell them. You don't tell them at all, right? You tell them the version that a grandchild should hear, right?
Right.
The nice version, the cleaned up version, the version that makes sense, that's logical, that's coherent, that's polite. We all do it. Everybody does it. We do it as, with our grandchildren. We do it with our country. We do it. That's just the thing we do. We clean up our history.
Sure.
But it's not true. It's not true.
Right.
And so it applies in organics. Okay. My experience of organics is that it was created not entirely, not even for the most part, but for a substantial part by con artists and swindlers and ex-cons and charlatans and various kinds of megalomaniacs of one variety or another. People who, if you met them, they might be charming. Mostly they were very charming because that's what they traded on. But they were not nice people. They were not nice people. And they were not nice people in all of the ways that you think people are not nice. They said things were organic when they knew perfectly well they weren't.
I remember those folks.
They took, people said, well, send me a certificate. And they went in the trash and they got a scrap of paper and they brought, I say it's organic. And they sent it out and say, here, there's your certificate. Okay. They were drug addicts. Okay. They were sexual predators. I know that in saying it this way, I'm not conveying the reality of it. So let me convey.
Oh, I think you are. I mean, you're painting a picture. You're painting a picture.
Let me tell you a story.
Go.
And I'm going to clean this up because I don't want to.
Oh, you've already ruined it. Don't start a story with I'm cleaning it up.
I'm just clean this up. There was a nice young man in Santa Barbara in the late 70s, early 80s, and his name was Guru Das. And
I haven't heard that name in forever.
Right. And he had a nice business sourcing produce from all of the farmers in the Ventura, Santa Barbara area, right, and bringing it down to LA and selling it to folks in LA that wanted it. And that was at a time when there weren't a lot of people doing that. So he was the guy. He was the Santa Barbara guy. He brought all the Santa Barbara produce down. And that was great. And so his business grew. It wasn't, instead of it was Guru Das in a truck, now it's Guru Das. And I forget his name, maybe James. Maybe you remember, but let's call him James. Anyway, it was Guru Das and James in a truck. And they were driving back and forth and it was fine. I guess there isn't really a nice way to say this, but at that time, the big dog in Santa Barbara was a thing called Sunburst Farms.
Oh, yeah.
And Sunburst Farms, make a long story short, they were the biggest organic operation in that area. And they sold their produce in LA too. So in a teeny tiny way, Guru Das and Sunburst were competing for business in LA.
Right.
And Guru Das was good at his work, and he was very gregarious and very charming, and he was doing fine. He was holding his own, even though Sunburst was really, a bigger, more efficient operation. But Guru Das was great. Well, a moment came when there was no organic celery. Nobody had any celery. So everybody's hunting around. Where's the celery? Couldn't find any organic celery. Well, Sunburst had a celery crop. And Guru Das didn't. Now, Sunburst, because there was no celery, they could have sold that celery for a lot of money. But instead, they sold it really, really, really cheap. But they said, if you want our celery, you got to buy all the other stuff. But everybody wanted the celery. So all of a sudden, Gruados didn't have any business because everybody's buying everything from Sunburst in order to get the celery, and Gruados was out. This went on for a while because Gruados didn't have any celery, and Sunburst celery seemed to go on and on and on. And Gruados was really suffering. He had bills to pay, and he wasn't getting any sales, and he was struggling.
Right.
He had a hard time, and maybe he wasn't going to make it. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but it was touch and go.
Sure.
And so they were feeling, him and James, they were feeling a lot of pressure. And I don't know what happened. And I'm not saying anything about anybody. I'm just saying that I was my impression.
It's
that
a coulda.
They had a lot of pressure on them.
Right, right.
One day, James got in the truck, drove up onto the freeway, going westbound on the eastbound side, got in a head-on collision and killed himself, or was killed.
Right.
I don't know if those things are connected. I have no idea. Okay. It could have been that James hadn't slept in a couple of days, because in those days, 48, 50-hour week wasn't unusual. Or 40,
40, you mean a 40-hour day?
Yeah, it wasn't unusual. So maybe he just got on the freeway the wrong way because
sure,
he wasn't thinking straight. Or maybe he couldn't deal with the pressure that he was under because of the business. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Okay. But that was life. That was life. Okay. That was us. That's what we did.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when I look around now and I listen to people talk about the history of organics as having to do with Eve Balfour and the folks in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, and all that kind of stuff, and how, everything was all neat and tidy, and we were all, philosophically committed to this and that, and build our business based on, being such nice people and doing ethical business, and it all just worked out because we were just all just really lovely human beings.
That's not so true.
It is. Well, it absolutely isn't true, but it doesn't matter. Okay. It really doesn't matter. But what matters is this. What matters is this. It matters that we tell ourselves the truth. Okay. And that if we go through our lives, if we think that the business decisions we make are based on that false history, we will make bad business decisions. Okay, we will think that things work in ways that they do not.
They do not work. Yeah. Okay. Well said.
And so it's not that we need to dig up old skeletons and wag our fingers at people, but we need to know how things work so that we don't make bad business decisions going forward. Yeah. And that's why I say I'm sick and tired of listening to the lives of the saints. We weren't saints. Okay. We had a vision, we had a goal, and we did whatever the hell we had to do to
win the day. Yeah, no, totally. Well, you brought up some names and you talked a little bit, and I want to come back around a little bit to Southern California. How important was Southern California in shaping up today's organic landscape?
Well, I told myself,
and we've had this conversation too. You and I have talked about this at length, and it's a great conversation.
Well, I told myself I was going to start this conversation differently than it turned out that I did, but I want to say it now. And that is, I happen to be the one that's here, but I'm only here because of a group of people that I had the privilege to work among.
100% agree with that.
Any of whom could be here. all of whom deserve to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All of whom can tell you just what I'm telling you, because we all knew the same thing. We all had the same kinds of experiences.
Right.
We can all say these things. And I feel very strongly that my talent is talking. I'm pretty good at talking. Okay. So I get to be the one that talks. But all the other ones who maybe weren't so good at talking, they deserve to be here too. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be mentioned. They deserve to be acknowledged. And to that end, I want to take your time and I want to read you a list.
Go ahead.
Okay. And it's not in any order. The first one is not more important than the last one. It's kind of a list that is in the order of how I happen to remember them. So
and what is the list of who are they? What are
these are people who were there in the beginning.
Yeah, it's really shaped things.
Who one time I was talking to a woman there's a woman named Melody Meyer who should be on this list. And someone was telling me how they really admired Melody and thought that she was just terrific and accomplished so much and was such a capable person. And I said, yeah, I know. And she is all of those things, but let me explain who Melody is. And she said, oh, okay. So I said, Melody is the kind of person who would look at a mountain and say, I want to climb that mountain. And she started climbing, and she wasn't trained, and she wasn't equipped, and she wasn't prepared. And she busted her ass, and she struggled, and she sweated, and she persevered. And after an enormous struggle, she finally got to the top of the mountain. And she looked around and said, well, ain't this nice? Here I am, top of the mountain. And pretty much just about the time she got to the top of the mountain, she ran as fast as she could to the edge of the mountain, and she leaped off the mountain. And she was falling through space. And she said, I think I ought to find a place to land. Okay. And I said, there was a whole generation of folks like that.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, she's a gem. She's an amazing individual. One of my all-time favorite people.
And so this is a list of those folks.
Yeah, lay it on us.
Bill Sutherland, Odilo Anguiano, Debbie Boyle, Darcy Hamilton, John Givens, Mark Derby, Greg McAllister, Todd Linsky, Diane Dempster, Rick Lejeune, Herman Ruiz, Erwan, Co-Opportunity, Jimbo, Anthony Monroe, Peter Oil, Myra from Organics Unlimited, Rich Hart, Steve Taft, Bill Hallbaum, Pat Raymond, Tom Underwood, Scott Hawkins, Robert and Helene Beck, Ray Hachia, Pat Leonard, Sue Hager, Nancy Shiganaka, Becky Hildebrand, Jack Hoskins, Pete Wolf, Phil Arena, Joe Hamada, Al Steindorf, Juan and Maria Ibarra, Tony Chompy, Peter Risley, Paul Garrett, Michael Abelman, Chris Thompson, Russ Postel, and Alan Kawahara.
Wow, what a list that is. And if I can just jump in really quick, literally, you cannot be standing in the space today in the organic produce space and not throw a tip of the cap of appreciation to every name that was there, because you would not be standing here today if they didn't exist before you. I assure you of that. What a great list. And all these folks, amazing people, amazing stories, so many names that you threw out there that I can remember and have met and have done business with and been around. I mean, that's awesome, Dave. What a great list that is.
Well, those folks that I mentioned, not all of them, but the largest portion of them are based out of Southern California. We're based out of Southern California. They did what they did in Southern California. Yeah, well,
it's a huge backbone to this industry.
There's no doubt that you could put together lists like this for folks in Central Coast, for folks in Marin, for folks in the Pacific Northwest. You could even put a list like that together for folks in the San Joaquin Valley.
100%.
And the thing is that at one point I decided it would really be fun to figure out, to do a little history of organics. And I started looking into it, and I realized that the people in Central Coast, Santa Cruz area, they know that organics started there. They know that. And the folks in Marin, they know that organics started there.
Yep.
And the folks in Pacific Northwest, they know that it started there. And the folks in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Michigan, they know that it started there. And the folks in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, they know that it started there. And there's probably folks in the Midwest that know for sure that it started there.
Yeah.
And nobody's wrong. Nobody's wrong. Okay. So I realized that it's not a matter of saying where it started. It doesn't have anything to do with that.
Right.
Okay. It started in all those places, and all the people who were there at the beginning in those places deserve recognition and our admiration and respect. And I have nothing to take away from any of those people. I think they're all great. But the question is not where did it start? Not, what group of farmers figured out how to farm in this way, and what group of farmers educated other farmers to adopt these kinds of practices.
Right.
Okay. It happened in lots of places. Okay. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, how did something that was really small scale, really,
fringe, very
big,
fringe.
Yeah. How did that become a national market? How did that happen? Okay. And the answer is, it happened in LA.
Yeah.
Now, why did it happen in LA? Because LA is the place in California where all of the farmers in California would send their leftover produce. Okay. All the farmers in the San Joaquin Valley, when they had too much, on a truck to LA. All the farmers in Salinas and in Watsonville, when they had too much, ship it to LA. And LA was the dumping ground.
Right.
And we get good produce and we get bad produce, but whatever they had too much, it would come to LA. So a whole industry grew up in LA that was dedicated to getting rid of all of this extra food. And they couldn't sell it all in LA. It was too much. So they figured out how to ship produce from Los Angeles all over the United States.
Yeah.
They built that infrastructure, not organic. None of this was organic. This was conventional. But the infrastructure, the knowledge, the technique for selling and shipping produce all over the country existed in LA, and it did not exist in San Francisco. It did not exist in Seattle. It did not exist in Chicago. It did not exist in Detroit. And New York was the destination, so for sure it didn't exist there.
Right.
It existed in LA. And when organic produce started coming into LA, it came to the attention of that industry. Okay. And some of the folks on this list, Russ, Allen, Scott Hawkins, Greg McAllister, those were the people that figured out how to take this essentially local fringe crop and turn it into something that could be shipped all over the United States.
Yep.
And that was a unique contribution. Okay. It was a unique contribution. Nobody else was doing it. Nobody else could do it. Nobody else knew how to do it. Nobody else had the resources to do it.
Yeah. We didn't know how to do it back then. It was like you said earlier, it was kind of like we all figured it out on the fly in a lot of ways.
Oh, Absolutely. The thing about it, Todd, I was talking to Dave, who owns Western Mixers, Dave
Right.
Bolstad. And by the name, you can tell that was a business whose purpose was to ship mixed loads of produce to customers outside of the LA area. That's what they
Right.
did. That was their
Right.
business. And I said, when you started, what was a mixer? And I said, in the 70s and 80s. He said, oh, well, back then, the trailers weren't as good, the reefer units weren't as good. It was different back then. So for us in the 70s and 80s, a mixer was half cabbage, half lettuce. Two different commodities on the same trailer.
Right.
So I said, well, so you guys never put like 30 or 40 different commodities on a truck, right? Oh, no, he said, you couldn't do it. The suspensions weren't good enough. The reefers weren't good enough. The trailers weren't well insulated. You couldn't do it. It wasn't possible. And, trying to be diplomatic and polite, I said, oh, well, thank you for telling me, because in those days, you and me and all of our sleazy friends, we were doing exactly that. We were just too dumb to know we weren't supposed to be able to do it.
Well, it worked out.
Did work out.
It worked out.
But to me, when you ask about LA, that's most of the answer to the question. We did something that folks weren't doing anywhere else. But the other thing, and this is probably, as good a place to wrap up as any. You know how in rock and roll they say that we are all Chuck's children?
Yeah.
Because Chuck Berry invented all the licks that all the rock and rollers play to this day.
Right.
Okay. And in organics, we are all Gypsy Boots children.
Oh, wow. There's a name I haven't heard forever.
Okay. We are all Gypsy Boots children.
I used to remember Gypsy coming into my store.
Oh, yeah. Gypsy was the grandchild of a group of German immigrants who came to the United States. They were the hippies of the 1880s and 1890s.
Yeah.
They would run naked through the fields, and they would grow things with no chemicals, and they would believe in physical fitness, and
He was that.
And all of those kinds of countercultural things in the 1880s and 1890s. And Gypsy was their literal grandchild.
Yeah, he was. God, I've never seen anybody throw a football harder than he could throw one.
Oh,
He carried one with him all the time in his car. He used to throw it. He used to always want to play in the parking lot.
And the thing was that he was the carrier of a legacy of a peaceable kingdom.
Yeah.
A kingdom in which humans and animals and plants could all live in harmony with one another. That was his vision. And he transmitted that to generations and generations of people in Southern California. And the organic people in California were his beneficiaries. And we carried on that vision of a peaceable kingdom from Gypsy. Okay. And I think that when you look back at the history of organics, that was something that was unique to Southern California.
Right.
Because in Southern California, there was an enormous historical depth to the community out of which organic produce grew. And that historic soil, that cultural legacy did not exist in the Central Coast. It did not exist in Marin. It did not exist in Emmaus. It did not exist in the upper Midwest. Okay. So the spiritual aspect to organics, the communitarian aspect to organics, the sense in which organics could be the vehicle for not just a new kind of farming or a new set of technical procedures that would replace petroleum, but the vision for a community in which agriculture was carried on in a way that nurtured human beings and nurtured the planet and promoted a peaceable kingdom. That was Southern California. That was unique to Southern California. And to me, to sort of continue on as if that never happened, we cut ourselves off from what is most vital to us.
Right. Well, and the reason, if you take a look at the backdrop behind me, if you watch this on video, and the reason we threw the question out there is it's something you and I have been talking about, and it's something I think you and I are going to go pursue, and that is to what I've dubbed the Weinstein files, but is to get these folks up on this platform and to start sharing some of these stories and get some of these people the recognition and get some of the history and some of the conversations out that I think are very important that we pass down. It's no different than passing down traditions from generation to generation. I think it's very important that generation, those folks, get up on a platform that has an opportunity for them to share their stories and the why and the hows, and not only appreciate who they are as individuals and what they've contributed, but I think there's some life lessons to be learned for those that are out there today that are, in this space because they walked into it, not because they necessarily wanted to be in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So,
well,
exciting.
In that spirit, Todd, I want to honor you for creating a space in which that can happen. I think it's a contribution that will hopefully long outlive you and provide lasting benefit to people that we don't know who aren't even born yet.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, because I think there's some, when you think about the names that you read off, and again, it's one of those, if you know, if you don't, you're going to love to find out, because they're amazing individuals. And I'm excited about doing it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be like old home week in a lot of ways. There's a lot of folks there that you brought up I haven't talked to in a long time and thought about, but I'm looking forward to the opportunity as we create this and see where this road takes us. This has been a fun time. We've talked for a couple of hours already. It's been an absolute hoot. I hadn't even got to half the crap I wanted to ask you. So that means you got to come back, which means we got to move the ball down the field and do this again, because there's, again, like I said, there's stuff I didn't get to ask you. But, when I think about you and how important you are to me and how important you have been to my career and been on that other end of the phone and have corrected my ways and have taught me to look at things differently with different eyes, I just wanted to say thanks. I just want to say thanks for what you've done for me personally and for taking the time to hang out with me today and to plant some seeds and to throw some things out there to get people thinking. I think that's how we change the world, is by conversation and uplifting and getting people to think a little bit differently and present ideas. So I appreciate you for that. And I appreciate you hanging out with me.
It is, it's an honor for me, and I appreciate the opportunity, Todd. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Everybody, thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for being a part of this broadcast. Thanks for hanging out with Todd-versations. We appreciate you. Go check us out on social media, like us, subscribe to the broadcast and the podcast and everything else. That's why we're doing it. We want to uplift messages and stories just like we've done today, and to give you something to think about, because that's, again, how we're going to change this world. Like I always say, go inspire somebody. This conversation is inspirational to me. I hope it is to you. But inspiring somebody is something we can do every day. It's not hard to do, and it's so meaningful, right? Just say hello to your neighbor today. Tell your post person you appreciate them delivering your mail every single day, and go out of your way. Buy somebody behind you at Starbucks. Buy their coffee one morning. See how it makes your day turn out. Anyways, we appreciate you. Thanks for being here, Dave. Much love to you, my brother, for being here. I do appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon. Take care.